Hi again, this is Linda Abraham, and I'm going to be presenting GMAT low scores, retaking, and strategies for success today. I want to thank you all very much for coming. First of all, a word about me. I have been an MBA admissions consultant since 1994. I'm also the co-founder and first president of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. I've been quoted on MBA admissions by Poets and Quants, the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News, Business Week, and other publications regarding MBA admissions. And most importantly for you folks, I'm looking forward to sharing my 20 plus years of admissions experience with you today. Before we begin, I wanted to mention a few to-dos that will help you maximize your time here and one that will help us improve these webinars. First, if you've not yet downloaded your webinar worksheet, which you should have gotten via email, take a second to do so and print it out. It's linked to in the control panel, and I believe that if you do print it out and use it for taking notes or just following along, you'll get much more out of the webinar today. And I know that there were some glitches with our emails, our pre-webinar emails, so you may not have gotten it. I'm going to take an extra second to emphasize that. Again, it's in the handout section of your control panel. My suggestion is that you open it, print it out, and use it, as I said, to take notes. Number two, I'm going to ask a few questions during the presentation and ask you to raise your hand in response. You can do so by clicking on the hand icon, two icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. Number three, we're going to use the question window for both your questions and your answers. So if I ask an open-ended question in the course of the webinar, please respond in the question window. And of course, if you do have a question, you can also post it in the question window at any time. And we're going to try and address the most broadly applicable questions at the end of the webinar. I've left time for Q&A. I also want to mention that we're going to have a contest towards the end of the webinar. You can win, and the contest will be entirely based on material that I'm presenting during the webinar. And the final point, when you leave, you're going to receive a short survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback. And as a matter of fact, this particular webinar is the result of feedback that we received from previous webinar participants. I've left plenty of time for questions at the end, so if you have a question, just jot it down. Again, you can post it in the question window, and then we'll address as many as possible towards the end. Before we start, I want to get a better sense of where you're at with the GMAT and also just where you're at, period, literally. So in the question window, could you please tell me where you're located? City and state in the United States, city and country outside the United States. That would be in the question window. Philadelphia, Chandigarh, India, I'm probably mispronouncing that, sorry, Dallas, Texas, Seattle, Washington, Sao Paulo, Washington, D.C., London, I think we're up to 4 continents now, Lucknow, India, New York City, New Jersey, Pune, India, Washington, D.C., Delhi, Toronto, Canada, Bangalore, India, Delhi, Mumbai, Baltimore, Maryland, Houston, Texas. What a pretty international crowd here, Los Angeles, oh, a neighbor, okay, I'm in Los Angeles also, welcome. Welcome from near and far. Now, I'd like to know a little bit more about where you're at in terms of the GMAT. So, how many times have you taken the GMAT? Once, twice, or 3 or more times? You can indicate, just click on the appropriate option on your screen. With 81% having voted, here are the results. 67% of you have taken it once, 23% twice, and 10% 10 or more times. Okay, and the next question is, which statement do you identify with most? You took the GMAT and you bombed it and you're planning to retake, or you took the GMAT and you're not sure if you should retake or not. Okay, again, please indicate the one that you identify with the most. I'm going to close the poll and share it. 83% took the GMAT and bombed it and are definitely planning to retake it. 17% took the GMAT and not sure if they should retake. All right, well, we're going to have advice for both groups. I think, yeah, there'll be advice here for both groups. Okay, and one last thing before I dive actually into the content. I don't want you nervously wondering if and what our special will be today, so I'm going to tell you right now. It's $250 off any of our application packages, and we'll be reposting the URL also via email. The coupon code is GETMBA, and the offer ends May 23rd. So you will have a full week to get in touch with us, to review our services, to talk to a consultant, and to save $250. But that week goes pretty fast if you don't get started on the process. So I'm hoping that after the webinar today, I suggest that after the webinar today, you check out that service and take advantage of the special so you can also get full value from the package and get going on your applications as early as possible. Now, most of you are here because you took the GMAT and aren't happy with it on some level. Let's see if I can't help shed some light on the role of the test score in MBA admissions and whether you should retake it. Most of you are apparently planning to do so or not. Now, the focus of the webinar is going to be the GMAT, obviously from the title, but we'll also reference the GRE occasionally. And any of you here are you taking or have you taken the GMAT? Just raise your hand if that's the case. GRE, I'm sorry, not the GMAT, the GRE. Let me put all your hands down. Any of you taking the GRE? Okay, a small number. Got it. Thank you. Very few. All right. Here are, what are some, in the question window, please, what are some common myths about the GMAT? I'm going to tell you my favorites in a minute, but I'd like to hear what you think. What's a common myth about the GMAT? You don't have any? In the question window, please. All right, I'll give you mine. The first myth is that the GMAT is everything in MBA admissions, and if you get a high score, you are guaranteed admission. Okay, it's the most, okay, so now I'm getting some myths. It's the most important part of the application, which is basically the first myth that I'm stating. It's huge deciding data point. True, it's pretty key to get admitted. Okay, well, pretty key to get admitted. Yes and no, we're going to get to that in a minute. But those are some pretty important myths. The other very common myth, not as common as the one you're hitting on, is that since the MBA admissions is holistic, I really don't need to worry about my GMAT because I have great grades and wonderful experience. That's also a myth that I have heard. It's not as common as the one that it is everything in admissions, though. A fact, let's look at some facts, though. The GMAT is the one element that is a constant among all applicants except for those taking the GRE. And there are ways to translate the GRE and the GMAT. Schools and grading systems differ. The quality of education differs. Even on the same campus, taking classes from different professors can have different grading scales. And academic quality also varies enormously between schools and even between professors. The GMAT is a constant that you all share. Also, the GMAT score correlates very strongly to success in the first year of business school. It is not necessarily predictive of success future in life. I've never seen any data on that. And it also is not a measure of self-worth. And sometimes applicants can get a little confused on that point to their detriment, unfortunately. Another fact, and this is not an official use of the GMAT, is that the GMAT is used by applicants, admissions offices, and some rankings, U.S. News in particular, as a measure of student quality or ability. I'm not saying it's right, but it is reality that many use the GMAT score as a proxy for quality and talent. Now, U.S. News, one of the most influential U.S. rankings, includes it as a factor in its rankings. It's actually 16% of the rankings. And the correlation that I calculated on I don't think it's changed any. If anything, it's probably stronger than when I last calculated it. But there's also a correlation with Business Week's rankings. Is the GMAT the most obvious or most important element in your application, as some of you said when I asked for the myth? It can be, but it certainly isn't always. I once heard a Wharton admissions officer say, this was years ago, what's the most important element of your application? His response was the weakest one. So if the GMAT is your weakest element, it's probably a pretty important one because it can keep you out of a business school, but it can rarely get you in, especially the top ones. Schools don't admit GMAT scores. They might reject GMAT scores, but they don't admit them. So, and it can also be a very important factor in determining if you get merit aid. So there's no question that the GMAT is an important element in the application, but it's not the only important element. Schools aren't lying when they say that MBA admissions is holistic, but holistic doesn't exclude the GMAT. Now, I'd like you to raise your hand. Remember we did that hand-raising exercise before? Raise your hand if you think that the quant is all that really matters. Anybody? All right, we're getting only 4%. Okay, not too many. Raise your hand if you think that the verbal is all that really, well, let me put your hands down. Verbal is all that really matters. Raise your hand if you think that the verbal is all that really matters. We're getting a little more here. We get 10%. Okay. And raise your hand if you think that both are important. Wait. Okay, now raise your hand if you think that both are important. Yep. Okay, we're over 50%. I'm certainly with those of you who said that both are important. Schools want students who can both add and subtract and talk, who can calculate and communicate. These are both really, really important skills in business school and, frankly, in business. So don't focus exclusively on the total score. Just yesterday I was looking at a client's score, and he did superbly on the quant and very weakly on the verbal. I said, you got to get that verbal up. So what do you do about that GMAT? Well, first of all, if you haven't taken it yet, and obviously all of you have, but for those of you who know that you're retaking it, I strongly encourage you to study as hard as you can, to study your tail off, to do the best you can on the GMAT. It is an element of your record that you can still influence through study, as this chart here shows. There's a strong correlation between score and the amount of time you put in. Most people benefit from a course, but they're not mandatory. And I would suggest that you check with your friends, GMAT Club, Beat the GMAT, to determine the best approach for you. And since all of you have already taken it, if you feel that you studied really hard the first time, if you didn't study so hard, then obviously just study harder, maybe do more. But if you feel that you really put in a good effort with whatever approach you took, whether it was self-study, a traditional class, an online course, then I would suggest that you up your game and take a different approach. And whatever you do, don't take it on a lark. Now, again, almost all of you have already taken it, so I don't think I have to emphasize that one too much. Let's also review GMAC's score cancel policy. You need to know it for test day. ETS with GRE has score select, so it can choose which tests to report to the schools. Fees may apply. Check with ETS on that. But GMAC has a very generous reinstatement policy. So if you cancel your score, you can, for a fee, reinstate it for almost 5 years. And that's as good as long as the score is good for. It's 4 years, 11 months to be exact. Canceling, I suggest that you go into your next test with a cancel score in mind, both for total score and test components. If you have any doubts, cancel. You can always reinstate. And canceling just gives you more flexibility than accepting the score. Now, obviously, if you get the score you wanted, then accept it, go home, celebrate. At the testing center, you have up to 72 hours to cancel the score for for free rather. And after that, you have 72 hours to cancel it for a $25 fee. The reinstatement fee is $50, and again, you have 4 years and 11 months to reinstate. What should be your cancel score? Or if you accepted a score, should you retake? Evaluate your score in context. Your goal is, for top programs, and context is king in most admissions decisions here, okay? For most top programs, I'm really talking about U.S. News Top 10, you want to be over the 80th percentile on each section of the GMAT. And this will, I think, eventually apply to the IR, but it's not there yet. This is a guideline. It's not an ironclad rule. Do not have a freak attack if you get 78th percentile or 79th percentile. It's not like that. And some schools are going to be more lenient on one area than the other. This is a guideline, okay? And realize, again, context counts. The GMAT score isn't looked at in a vacuum. And when I talk about context, what I'm primarily talking about is the schools that you're most interested in attending and you, the rest of your profile. So those are the two primary elements that comprise context. Again, it's you or the rest of your profile and the schools that you're applying to. So what is the average GMAT and the 25th to 75th or 20th to 80th percentile ranges for your target programs? Are you from an overrepresented group that usually does very well on the GMAT, or the opposite? What does your transcript say about your academic ability? If you have that quant or verbal score that's a little bit below what you wanted, but your grades in that area are really, really strong, that's very different from somebody whose grades in that area are below average and weak. Very different profile. What does your transcript say about your academic ability? What does your work experience say about your quantitative and communications ability? The answer to those questions determine the context. Now, let's first look at school context, and I'd like you to put on an admissions hat. Okay, put on your admissions consulting hat, and I'm going to ask a series. I'm going to give you a made-up case and ask you how you would advise this person. Okay, Joe is applying to several programs with an average GMAT score of 660 to 680. His score is 680 and pretty balanced. His work experience is competitive, and his GPA is a 3.4 and in line with the average GPA at his target programs. Should Joe retake? And here's a poll where you can express your views. Okay? What do you think? Should Joe retake? 46% yes, Joe should retake. 54% no. So that's a pretty divided group, relatively evenly divided group. I would go firmly with the no group. I would not advise Joe to retake. His score is competitive. Everything about him is competitive for the programs that he is aiming for. That's, the rest of his profile is good. The schools are, it all fits and jives together. Now, let's look at a J. Here's a J. He is from an overrepresented group in the applicant pool. He came to the U.S. from India as a teen. He went to a public Ivy and earned a 3.3 GPA. He has some leadership and community service experience, but nothing too exceptional. He's a programmer. He's applying to an MBA program with an average GMAT of 710. His GMAT is 680, and his quant score is a 65th percentile. Should, and I'm going to post, sorry, there's the numbers for a J. And I'm going to post the poll for a J. Should a J retake? Yes, no. Should a J retake? I'm going to share the results with you. Okay. So overwhelmingly, most of you felt 88% that AJ should retake, a J should retake, and I agree with you. He definitely should retake because he is not competitive at his target programs. It's just that simple. And I think his chances of getting in are very poor. So his quant score is low for the schools that he's applying to. His overall score is low. His GPA is on the weak side. He's a programmer, which is he's Indian male IT, although he grew up in the United States, a very common cohort in the applicant pool, and one that tends to do above average on the GMAT. So you have to look at your, again, context. Does your GMAT score reinforce or contradict the evidence presented by your transcript? If your grades are strong, your GMAT is high, great, you're done. Put a check mark next to GMAT. But if your grades are below average and your GMAT is above average, then maybe you are really quite gifted, but just had a tough time in college. What's the context? Were you working to support yourself? Did you get sick? Was there family illness? Perhaps immaturity? It does happen. Let the admissions committee know the context and show them that the circumstances that contributed to low grades no longer exist. See if you can demonstrate that you now know how to apply yourself academically by taking business-related courses and acing them. Still, you're finished with a GMAT. If your grades are high and your GMAT is below average for your target school, can you retake? The best way to address a low GMAT is to do well the next time around. And most schools use the highest GMAT score, and of course, you can now cancel scores that don't represent your ability. So again, most of you are doing the right thing by retaking the test if you're concerned about the score. If The highest score, if you've taken it multiple times and your highest score still doesn't represent you well, perhaps you can at least show that you tried to raise or have raised it somewhat through effort and determination. I'm not suggesting 20 retakes, and you're going to see a little bit, we're going to get to multiple retakes in a minute. And note that two people with the identical overall GMAT score, both Joe and a Jay had a 680 GMAT, can get very different advice. Again, you have to evaluate your score in context. And the two critical elements of context are the schools you are applying to and the rest of you, the other elements of your profile. Again, this is a holistic process. Now let's put that admissions consultant hat back on. I'm going to try and illustrate a few more principles here. And let's meet Jane. Jane has a 3.5 GPA with an undergrad in communications from a good public university. She has worked in fundraising since college. She really wants to go to Haas, which has an average GMAT for accepted applicants of 725 and an average undergrad GPA of 3.71 in the class that entered in 2017, in other words, last year's class. The GMAT range, and I believe this is the full range, is 640 to 780. Now, Jane's past activism shows she identifies with Haas's 4 principles, and they really are important to Haas, but she's going to struggle to show she is competitive. Jane earned a balanced 670 the first time around when she took the GMAT. She retook, and her verbal score went up, but her quant score is still around a 65th percentile, and the overall is around 700. She studied really hard, and her practice exams are all in the 720 to 740 range, but the second time she took the exam, she was developing a migraine during the last hour. Now we're going to do another poll. Should Jane retake? How would you advise her? 47% said that Jane should retake, and 53% said no. And again, it's 81% of you. That's actually pretty interesting. I would advise Jane to retake, and I'll tell you why. I think she's going to have trouble convincing Haas that she can handle the quant, giving her undergraduate focus, her work experience, and the 65th percentile. Also, her practice scores were consistently higher, and she wasn't feeling well when she was taking the exam. So she has reason to believe that she can up it, both based on her practice tests and the fact that she wasn't feeling well. So I personally would advise her to up it. And again, in terms of the school that she wants to get into, she really needs to up the game. Now, have you retaken the test? Well, many of you have retaken the test. That came through in the poll I did at the beginning, twice or more. If your score didn't get to where you want it, is there other evidence that you can do well despite your low GMAT? Perhaps a demanding job. Again, her job wasn't very quantitative. Was the college program rigorous or quantitative? Her college program was rigorous, but it wasn't quantitative. And were there extenuating circumstances, i.e. changeable ones, that affected your score? Was there a jackhammer going outside the building? Was there an earthquake in the middle of it? I am from Los Angeles. And were you doing better on practice exams, consistently better, not just once or twice, I mean consistently? And could you perhaps change, and again, up your game with the prep approach if you weren't doing so well on practice exams? Now, here's a last case study, okay? May is struggling with the GMAT, especially the verbal portion. She's taken the test 3 times, preparing endlessly before each exam with different test prep approaches. Her scores have been 680, 700, and 670. She felt good each time she went to take the exam, and her practice scores have been in the mid to upper 600s. Once or twice, she got into the low 700s. Now, she worked as a financial analyst in China and in San Francisco. She has worked. She attended the Michigan Undergrad Business School and earned a 3.4. She has little community service, but she was a violin virtuoso growing up and even played in her university orchestra. She would like to attend Wharton, Booth, Columbia, or NYU Stern. Should May retake? And again, I'm going to share a poll here now. Hold on a second. Let's get the right poll up. There you go. Should May retake? Share the results. 50-50. I guess it was a good question. That's pretty unusual. Well, a decision has to be made. What would I tell May? I would tell May not to retake. She's taken the exam 3 to 5 times. 3 times. She took it 3 times. I would tell her not to retake. She studied really hard. There were no extenuating circumstances. I would, and then I would just tell her to accept that this GMAT score is her score and apply appropriately. Now, she probably should rethink her target programs a bit. She can perhaps, there's different ways she could go. I would say apply to 1 or 2 of the schools that were originally on her list, which included, again, Wharton, Booth, Columbia, and NYU Stern. I would consider applying to 2 of them and then widening her list, or apply to these programs round 1 and apply to other programs round 2 if she's not accepted. Obviously, Columbia is rolling. And just go that route. But I don't think I'd advise her to retake because she's done as well as she can do. As it happens, a couple of months ago, a friend of the family's son called me up with a very similar kind of situation. He happened to be taking the GRE, similar work experience, and he was asking me, did I think he should retake? And I said, the first time, I said yes. And the second time, he felt, I think 1 score went up and 1 went down. He didn't get it where he wanted it, and the quant was much more his problem. And I said, and then the second time, he just wrote me. He said, I took it too soon. I'm going to retake it 1 more time, and then that's that. And the third time for him, fortunately, he got the score he wanted, and we completely agreed that whatever came in on the third score, he was done taking the test. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that that's an ironclad rule for everybody, but I would say when you have 3 consistent efforts and 3 consistent results, I don't know that I would go on and try it again. I would advise against it and say she should focus on her application, school research, finding other programs that will support her goals and where she would be competitive. I wouldn't entirely give up on all 4 schools that she really wants to go to, but I would definitely tell her it's time to move on. All right. If your grades are high and you can point to strong grades, rigorous coursework, and demanding work experience to counteract the test score, go for it. But it's a tough one to overcome. All right. So you've been excellent admissions consultants. I think this was an interesting exercise. And let's have a little fun here and a little contest. I co-authored a book, MBA Admissions for Smarties, a few years ago, and I'm going to give it away as a prize now. So the first 2 people who answer the next question all in one window will get a copy of MBA Admissions for Smarties. You can choose paperback or Kindle in the U.S., Kindle only outside the U.S. And the question is, and again, please put your answer in one box before you hit enter. What are 2 of the 3 key facts or elements that make the GMAT an important part of any MBA application? Yes. Okay, Mirage. You got it. So far, I think Mirage is the only one who really got both of them. Yes, and Simi. Okay, so Mirage and Simi. You got it. It's a constant. Everyone takes the same thing, and it's easy to compare you among each other. And it has a very high correlation to performance in the first year of business school. It also can be considered, and it's used, it's not supposed to be used this way, but it is used as a measure of student quality when computed in school averages, rankings. And the other thing that is distinctive about the GMAT or the GRE is that you can always retake it and attempt to raise it. Now, the GMAT plays several roles in addition to serving as a way to determine your aptitude for top business schools, and we touched on this a minute ago. It can keep you out, but it can rarely get you in, right? It's that door, that threshold you have to go over. It is a significant factor in determining merit aid because schools want people with high GMAT scores in their classes. It makes them look good. And it can play a role, we didn't discuss this much, in screening for plum positions in management consulting and investment banking. And what are the implications for applicants? and again, you've already taken it once, the overwhelming majority of you, it means that the next time you take it, you want to do the best, the absolute best you can, and you want to prepare for it really, really hard. If you don't get the score you want and think you can improve it, it almost always pays to prepare again and to retake. Now, that may mean you need to apply for a later deadline, but the overwhelming majority of schools take your highest score, and you're better off applying a little later with a competitive score and a stronger application than earlier with a non-competitive score. At some point, if you can't raise your score, you need to adjust your target schools, your school choices. Another option you have, which we haven't discussed at all, is if other elements in your application are strong and your target programs accept the GRE, and most do at this point in time, consider taking the GRE. Some people will do better on one test than on the other. So the GRE is a little bit less expensive. You can report only the scores that you want reported. You have the ability during the GRE exam itself to go back and change answers. So you just need to choose the score that is going to work best for you. Now, some of you probably have, well, some of you are probably wondering now how to apply to your situation the principles and the examples I've provided. Many of you are already preparing for another retake. And all of you are wondering how to proceed and submit your BAST application, an application that spotlights your strengths and your fit with your target schools, and also shows you as a standout in the applicant pool. Accomplishing all the above, whether you retake and get the score you want or continue to struggle with a low test score, be it the GMAT or the GRE, is difficult. It's really hard, and it's stressful, and it's time-consuming. It's all those things. And as we agreed at the beginning of the webinar, this process isn't really about getting into business school or even about earning an MBA. We're talking about enhancing your professional future and maximizing your career opportunities. So you're now at a crossroads on your professional journey. As you start your pursuit of the MBA, you can either take a do-it-yourself approach or a professional approach. Given that we're talking about your career, lifelong earnings, and job satisfaction, I highly recommend the professional approach and engagement with an accepted consultant. We'd like to help you apply confidently and successfully. While you want to do this exactly once or once more, we've been helping applicants get accepted for over 20 years to top MBA programs. We'd love to help you not only get accepted, but get into a program that launches you on your dream career trajectory. Put simply, it pays to have an experienced professional guiding you in this critical process. Now, here's what you get when you work with an accepted.com consultant. You get access to expertise and experience. You reduce your stress. You save time. You optimize your school choice and application. And you learn how to mitigate weaknesses like a low GMAT score or advice on what to do about it. Candor, a mentor, and objectivity combined with expertise and decades of experience in MBA admissions. Now, some of you may say, accepted is expensive, and we're definitely not cheap because of the quality of our staff. However, there are also expensive risks associated with not using accepted. But you know what? Those don't, you can't add those to cart. Okay, those are just there, and they're usually underestimated. Reapplication can easily cost a couple $1,000s. You might have one additional year of pre-MBA earnings that can cost in the 5 figures in dollars. And you also could have, I hope it's not true, but additional year of a job you dislike. And then there's the potential that you could have gotten to a better program with lifelong higher earnings, network, and opportunity. And that could cost you in 5 or 6 figures easily. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected to work with us. They would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? Well, here's one. With an extremely low GMAT, below average GPA, and degree from a low-ranked university, I'm extremely blessed to be attending a top business school. My admission would not have happened without your guidance. I hired you as a consultant in January, not knowing that you will also turn out to be a doctor and an angel. Or this one. I just wanted to give you the good news that I got into Stanford as well. I want to thank you for your help with the essays. It was invaluable. I am now going to have a tough time deciding between Harvard and Stanford, but at least it's a nice problem to have. And we're going to put our money where our mouth is. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, we're offering registrants to this webinar $250 off any application package, MBA application package that we have. You can get to them at the URL. You can jot down the URL and the coupon code on your worksheet or on the back of an envelope or wherever you want. The offer ends May 23rd. So I'd strongly encourage you, get in touch with us, review the service. If you have any interest in it, you can talk to a consultant before the 23rd, get comfortable, and then save $250. And we're here to guide you and help you get accepted to the best MBA program for you. And now I'm happy to take your questions. Okay, so Sue asks, if I have already taken the GMAT, will my school see that poor score even if I apply with a better score? Yes, unless you canceled the score, and again, you had three days in which to do so. So I assume that those 3 days have passed. They will see the score, but they tend to look for the highest score. So if you do well the second time around, don't worry about the first score at all. Good question. Thank you. Okay, Manuel asks, are GMAT scores super scores similar to how the SATs could be highest quant, highest verbal? That's also a very good question, Emmanuel. Some schools do that. INSEAD does, Tuck does. I'm pretty sure Harvard does not, and most other schools don't. It's certainly not across the board. It's a few schools that do, specifically the two that I mentioned. You can ask regarding others. Okay, let's see. What do I consider to be overrepresented populations? Well, Indian IT is an overrepresented population. There also are, a lot of management consultants, a lot of financial analysts applying to business school. Those are also overrepresented in the applicant pool. It doesn't mean they can't get in, but it means that they definitely don't get diversity points. How do U.S. business schools evaluate GPAs outside the USA? There's no, on a 4.3 scale instead of a 4.0 scale? No, there's no one way of evaluating or automatically translating. Most schools, to my knowledge, have people on staff who can interpret a transcript, and they don't just, have a formula for translating European or Indian or international grading systems. They just know how to read them and interpret them. And they can tell if your grades were excellent, good, so-so, or I really would rather not talk about it. But there's no across-the-board translation scale. There are two services, ECE and WES, that can do a formal evaluation of your transcript. But I usually recommend that you go knowing that you assume the schools will be able to interpret your transcript unless you came from a very small school on the grading system, and know if you did well or didn't do well. Okay, there's an interesting one here. And if it's, would you suggest applying to a school more than twice if you were rejected twice and you believe that scores were the main issue? Well, scores can be a significant issue or the main issues. It's true. Well, first of all, I wouldn't recommend applying again if you don't raise your scores. If you do raise your scores, it's a good question. If you do raise your scores, I would also encourage you to at least consider getting what we call a rejection review, because if there were other things that need to be improved in your essays or your application, your short answers, whatever it may be, video if there's one, then you want to know about it before you apply a third time. Rachel, can you please chat the audience the link for the rejection review? Okay. And it's, if you can find that information out before you apply, you're going to be a lot better off than getting another ding. TJ asks, how much is geographic diversity important? I live in Texas and am targeting top 20 schools all over the U.S. I think geographic diversity is a factor in admissions. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. So, but if you realize that if you're applying to schools with national reputations or international reputations, they'll have a lot of applicants from Texas. If you're applying to a school that's mostly known locally, not in Texas, and local is outside of Texas, or it's a regional school, then coming from Texas would add an element of diversity to the class that they would consider. But it's not going to. It's a factor. It's an element. It's not the be all and everything of a decision. Do you help any person wanting to write MBA? Or do you focus on certain universities? For instance, I'm in South Africa. We work with MBA programs around the world, of people applying to English-speaking MBA programs, English language MBA programs. I think we have occasionally worked even with people applying in South African, but mostly North American, European, and occasionally Asian programs. But thank you. Sue asks, I'm almost 3 years out of undergrad. Can I include awards and activities from high school in my application? You're very welcome, Pendeka. I would not. It makes it sound like you haven't. No, I would not. I would not include high school awards unless there was something super duper. It'd have to be really, really amazing. But thank you for the question. Let's see what else we have here. What are competitive GRE scores for Columbia Business School and INSEAD? I haven't. INSEAD is very clear, by the way, that it strongly prefers the GMAT. I think it wants. Yeah, so you can. They have a whole thing on their site about that. Columbia Business School, I think, is neutral, agnostic between GRE and GMAT. But I haven't seen what their scores are. Poets and Quants may have that information from U.S. News. I would guess that it is probably around 130 overall. 330 overall. Sorry, 330 overall. Something in that range. But you can see on Poets and Quants, I know maybe 125 to above 125. 325. Sorry about that. How is 2 years of work experience at a family business perceived by the admissions committee? Well, it depends on the context. What did you accomplish for your family business in those 2 years? Was it really exceptional? You're going to be competing with people who have 4, 5, 6, 8 years of work experience. Have you accomplished in those 2 years what other people have taken 4, 5, 6, 8 years to do? Have you had major impact and contribution? It's on the low side. Are you going to be looking to return to your family business, or do you want to get a job in management consulting and investment banking, which really want to see more work experience before hiring an MBA? So I think that again, it's hard to say with just one data point like that, but it would really. So those are some of the things it would depend on. But thank you for the question. Okay, let's not get too hung up on this. How can I check the average GMAT score for an overrepresented group, and what does it compare to a non-represented group? At one point, GMAC had data, some data like overall from different groups, different locations. I don't think that's publicly available anymore. But for example, South Asia had much higher scores than, let's say, North America. And I don't remember the exact numbers anymore. But GMAC did at one point have that data. But it's definitely not by school. Sometimes I know clients have told us that they've talked to admissions officers at different schools and have been told that there can be a 30, 40, 50 point difference. So anyway. Okay. Dale asked, do admissions committees view a healthcare background differently? I'm looking at MBA programs in healthcare management. I'm wondering if they have different admission statistics. I haven't seen those, and I realize the value of specific statistics, but I also know that I think sometimes I sometimes get asked for statistics on incredibly small numbers. And that means that basically I don't have any valid data. And I'm always amazed that nobody asks how much data I have. So when you start looking at fairly small programs and, what are the stats and what's this percentile, it starts getting silly. And the healthcare programs within MBA programs are fairly small. and they, I think there might be a slight advantage, and it's a niche. So you're not in this big group of consultants or financial analysts or even investment bankers. You can look at the overall stats and assume that the overall breakdown for healthcare is pretty similar, maybe a tad lower because again, it's a niche. It's not one of the more common niches, but don't stress on that. Focus on making your application as good as it can be. I need to know. This is from Samya. I need to know. You're very welcome, Dale. I need to know how to analyze the mistakes in mock tests. I also need to know if my work experience of about a couple of months as a communications trainer be a good fit. The only kind of progression that I can think of is more and more clients. I feel that an MBA can increase prospects. I can strongly portray that. I did not have any other work experience with it. Didn't feel worthwhile. If you only have a couple of months of work experience, I would suggest that you look into a Master's of Management program and not an MBA. Okay, in terms of analyzing mistakes in mock tests, I believe that GMAT does have a product that helps with that. I think it's very important to know what you're making mistakes on. I'm forgetting the name of it at the moment, but if you go to GMAT, it does have an add-on program that will allow you to analyze the mistakes you're making in mocks. How are entrepreneurs viewed by the AdCom? Very positively. All right. I want to thank you very much for your time, your attention, your questions, your answers. And I want to close by sharing a thought and a story. The thought, the GMAT or GRE are an important element in your application. I think we've covered that really, really thoroughly. They're not the only important element, but definitely up there. There are also the essays, your resume, possibly a video, short answer questions, optional essays, and of course the interview. All these are in your control. Make them the best they can be with our help. The story. An applicant came to us with a GMAT 40 to 50 points below the GMAT average for his elite MBA program. He was stressed and not sure he should even try to apply. And here's what he wrote us. Just to jog your mind, you helped me apply to 7 schools in the USA, including Haas, Kellogg, and Fuqua. I was invited to interview with every school that I applied to despite my low GMAT of only 660. Now the results have started to come out, and so far I have been admitted to TUC and Fuqua. There is no way I would have been successful without your invaluable edits and mock interviews. I owe this success to you, Jennifer. Oh, and by the way, the resume you did for me has earned me an interview with McKinsey. And he was later accepted to Haas with a large scholarship and Ross, 5 out of the 7 programs he applied to. Now this applicant is someone just like you. He accessed the guidance he needed to overcome his low GMAT score. And working with Accepted, he also brought out his strengths and distinctive qualities and ultimately showed that he belongs at 5 top MBA programs. He got into 5 with Accepted's help. So can you get Accepted.